I caught up with Bryan Pearson, the former CEO of Loyalty One, which was the backbone of the Air Miles rewards program. He literally wrote the book on loyalty, and in this episode, he shares the ins and outs of building a loyal customer base. Bryan, thanks for joining. Really excited to have this conversation with you. Let's get right into it. You recently retired from Loyalty One as CEO in 2019. Tell us a little bit about your time there and what you've been up to since.
Yeah, it's hard to believe how long I'd actually been there. I left after almost 28 years of working at Loyalty One from the very beginning, being like the 20th guy in the room trying to get Air Miles to actually succeed in Canada, to becoming president in 99, to becoming CEO in 2006. So, I really grew up in the company and grew up with the industry. When you look back on it, it's hard to believe that you were in and around the space for as long as I was. But frankly, there was never really a dull day. In the latter decade, we doubled our overall revenues, plus I think maybe quadrupled, and 8 times return on the bottom line from where we were. And it was about expanding the business globally, adding an analytics business that really focused on retail analytics, and continuing to think about how we took Air Miles to another level. So that's been the run up to retirement. At retirement, what have I been doing? The plan was originally to travel, actually, Scott, if we're quite frank about it, for a year. Everybody said do nothing for 6 months to 12 years. People would be knocking down your door. And all that was pretty true, but nobody counted on a pandemic in the middle of my travel schedule. So we traveled for 6 months. And then I've sort of started life as a strategic advisor and a board member. And it's fun just to not be tied to anything and discover the great technologies that are out there. It's been exciting.
I'm sure a lot of young companies like a Statflo are learning a ton of information from you just based on your experience, scaling up a company like Loyalty One. So it's cool.
I'm finding that there actually is a cesspool of useful information back there somewhere. and I've enjoyed actually interacting and going back to the very early days in a lot of ways. I love startups. I love that early stage where you're really framing up what the value proposition is and trying to understand where the market's going, what customers are doing, and those sort of strategic, cultural, purpose-based discussions. I really love spending time doing that with entrepreneurs. It's very exciting.
So let's set the foundation on loyalty. You make a differentiation between loyalty with capital L and loyalty with a lowercase l. Can you explain the importance of this nuance?
Yeah, I think it gets down to basic customer marketing, which is versus sort of the intent of the business. And I always say big L loyalty is really about that true connection that a customer has with a brand. We used to define loyalty as the continued interaction between a consumer and a brand given a meaningful competitive alternative, right? That was sort of our definition of loyalty. And small L loyalty to me really is the programmatic things that you're doing and how you support and help create loyalty, big L loyalty. And I think that I started down this path years ago talking about measured marketing, and I always felt that a loyalty program was a great way to kind of cause the consumer to put their hand up, to effectively have them want to engage in a conversation and say, I'm interested in building, let's say, a deeper relationship. Maybe that's too strong a word, but a deeper connection with a brand or with a retailer. And that the mechanism that you create there is the opportunity to have a two-way dialogue and the opportunity to also be able to understand more about the customer so that you can frame the entire branded experience to really reach big L loyalty, which is foundational loyalty with a customer.
Can you talk about some of the tactical things that Loyalty One was focused on in driving big L loyalty for some of your biggest customers that were the retailers you supported?
Yeah, I think the focus we had from the very beginning was really to recognize that most of our clients, especially our retail clients, who didn't have a subscription base, really had no feel or understanding on what was happening in the underlying dynamics of their business, who was shopping, how frequently came in, how many customers were sort of loyal. And so we almost started with the Pareto principle, which was, basically the 80-20 rule, the understanding that a disproportionately small amount of your customers represent a large amount of your revenue and even larger amount of your profitability. understanding who the customers were, helping the clients to begin to think about how they focus not purely on what we used to call a conquest mentality, which was always about winning new customers, but on really about mining their existing customer base and finding ways to create better customers from people who had already made the decision and indicated that they could shop with you and use your services. So, it sounds very basic, but at the end of the day, if you turn the clock back 25 years, that was pretty monumental, and a big change for the way that those retailers thought about their businesses. From there, it really was the substance of learning how to market, how to use very targeted marketing communications, how to connect and figure out how to optimize your offer structures, and figure out what consumers were willing to do or not do by what today we would call A/B testing, right? This idea of providing different offers to different segments of your consumer base, and then seeing which responded, which created the greatest response, and then helping the companies that we worked with understand how to optimize this database and this database of information that we were creating together.
So a lot of your retailers were really using that contractor recurring revenue model that a lot of SaaS companies use to make sure that they had that recurring purchase behavior of customers and creating that loyalty where they went back to that grocery store or that drugstore or other retailer for all of their business.
I think most of the retailers, when we actually started to share the information, were surprised by the concentration of revenue that they had. And as we became more sophisticated, not only could we sort of look at the classic RFM, recency, frequency, monetary. In other words, when was the last time they were in? How frequently did they actually shop with you or use your services? And how much were they spending in total? Not only were we able to do that, which helped frame a bit of lifetime value calculation, another thing which has sort of come back to the forefront in the last little while. But we could get even deeper because we would start to look at the categories where people were buying. We were starting inferring things by virtue of not only the demographic information we collected by self-reported information, but also, what could be inferred by how the consumer used your services. And so, that profile became more robust and richer. Our learning on the offer dynamics became more robust and richer. And as a coalition, in other words, a company that sat in the middle of a whole bunch of different retail and service categories, we could really start to look at the consumer behavior as well and look for how consumers reacted over time, and the consistency in which they interacted in different sectors. I always laugh because the Bank of Montreal is one of our clients, and they used to say, "Well, what am I going to learn from the grocery customer and what the customer is doing in grocery or in fuel retail? It's irrelevant. I sell credit cards and bank services," and it's like, the fundamental dynamics, the decision tree might be different, but the fundamental dynamics of how that consumer goes about engaging and what they see as valuable and how they want to be treated, those experiences were relatively consistent. And so there was a lot of leverage that we got just by working in so many different categories with so many different customers.
That's amazing. And so I think that brings me to my next question. You wrote a book called Loyalty Leap back in 2012. That's 8 years ago already now. Over the last 8 years, what are some things that you think loyalty marketers and brands are still getting wrong?
A lot, unfortunately. And I think it's actually this whole pandemic COVID situation has brought quite a bit of it to light. So what are the things that they really haven't done? I think there's still a large gap for most people who have these programs believe they're just an alternative to discount. It's another monetary value driver, and they aren't really focusing on understanding the broader spectrum of what you can do with the customer. I think the second thing is, there's a lot being done these days with data and trying to eliminate what I call the data silos or data ghettos within the organization. But my sense is that there still is a lot of work that can be done to really focus on understanding data as an asset and how you structure it and consolidate it so you can create a language which is spoken across the organization. And I still believe that that's not entirely where it needs to be. And then I think the last one is just a byproduct of sort of the marketing environment we're in. So much is skewed to the digital platforms that are there, and the cost of those digital platforms is such that, I think there's still an ability to be fairly sloppy in your marketing. And what I mean by that is untargeted, or just doing retargeting because somebody searched, your product category at some point. And while that's all very effective, I just think there's a lot more intelligence that can be brought to bear on how you engage customers, and there might be a return. So I have sort of 3 predictions coming out of COVID, and I think a lot of people opened the box, which was their loyalty program, thinking we got rich sets of customers in here, we've got data on them, and they're highly responsive, and this is going to save the day. And then they opened the box, and a bunch of moths flew out, and they were like, "Oh my God, we've underinvested in this asset. We haven't taken care of it. We've taken it for granted, and now when we need it, it's not the asset we think we had." And so, my bet is there'll be a refocus or a renaissance around loyalty or customer experience based initiatives. In other words, things that tie you back to understand your customer better. I also think that because of the skew to online in many categories now, I think we'll see a return also to people thinking about their proprietary communications in a more relevant and meaningful way, trying to connect with customers in a way that makes more sense. So that's, ideally, I think those 2 things will come to pass. And, I'm hoping that in the course of that, the analytics will get even deeper.
So you touched on proprietary ways of communication tied to loyalty, and the fact that a lot of large companies were going digital and trying to do retargeting ad buys and all that type of stuff. Do you see as this starts to transition out of COVID, do you see a larger need for that personalized local approach to customer interactions?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always value in more personalized and local. I think that if you go back early in the days of the Air Miles program, I was going into the supermarket. I was spending my dollars every week. There's a pretty consistent shopping behavior that I exhibit. And then you'd get your offers from the retailer, and 1 out of 10 things that they offered you bonus miles on to come in and spend were things you'd never put in your basket. And you kind of look at that and you go, well, wait a second, like, I know you're collecting information inherently, and how can you not at least acknowledge who I am as a customer and kind of how I'm interacting with your products and services? And that used to really aggravate me. And we did some testing and showed that, if you send 10 new offers to somebody, your propensity of somebody to respond to one of those is much lower than if you send 7 offers that are relevant and 3 that are pushing the customer to try new things within your store. And that is putting it into a personal context. You've got the sense that the retailer is saying, hey, I know who you are. I'm giving you things that indicate that I understand how you shop my store. And oh, by the way, here's a couple things you might want to try basis, the kind of shopping behavior that you've exhibited in the past. And you see the response rates of those offers went up fairly dramatically, as long as you weren't trying to do something really obtuse. So I really do think that there's so much opportunity in just about 95% of the stuff that comes across my email box. You would think that I have never interacted or they've obtained my email in some nefarious way, and I've never interacted with that company in the past. There's no acknowledgement of what I've done. There's no acknowledgement of the types of wine I like to drink. It's just, here's a bunch of stuff that you can get extra points on or discounts on. Yeah. And so I think the world would just be a richer place. I had, if you permit me one more story, I had, one of the chapters in the book from way back was really around privacy and why I didn't think privacy was a significant issue if you actually use the data with good purpose and with good intent around reflecting the consumer's interests and needs back to them. And the reason for that is really pretty straightforward. And that is that if I am willing to share information and you're willing to act on that, I'll share even more information. And I used to use this example of the reporters when they pressed me on it, which is, well, imagine you go into your grocery store and you love organic and biodynamic foods and that kind of stuff. And all of a sudden you went to your local grocery store and one aisle had been completely dedicated over the weekend to actually offering these products and putting them all in one place so that it was easier to shop. And if I told you that they'd use the data on the customers in the store to basically decide on how they're going to reline the store to serve their customers better, do you think that's okay that they're using that information to do that? And would you appreciate it as a consumer? And, for 100% of them said, yeah, that would be a great experience. That'd be something I would hope that the retailer, my retailer would do. So, I think it ranges everywhere from communications all the way to the physical interpretation of how you bring your brand forward. And data and knowing your customers, isn't that foundationally the principle of what we're in business to do? Understand our customers and serve them the best way we can and provide them with an experience which lives with our purpose and brand, right?
So I have to ask, I worked for Frito-Lay, PepsiCo years ago, right out of school. I remember the transition of having those organic aisles 15 years ago, 16 years ago. Was that based on Loyalty One recommendation and data? Or is that theoretical?
That was a theoretical. It was based on trends as much as anything else and trying to highlight it and probably some consumer feedback. But you could definitely, the mechanics of being able to go in, identify where consumers are buying things and then run test store if you want, and do a realignment and then look at how consumers behaved and did those consumers that bought those purchases actually, now that you reline the store, actually double down and do incremental amount of volume and therefore spend more money in the store. Those are tests that we definitely did conduct in a variety of ways over the years. But I can't claim responsibility for helping the food retailers put organic aisles in their stores.
All right, fine. So any example, you talked about what's not going right, what a lot of the loyalty marketers are not doing right. Any examples of companies or industries, verticals, et cetera, that are getting this right?
Question I often don't love answering, just because I think that there's lots of retailers that are doing instances or examples of programs or tactical loyalty that they express what I'd love to see in a good way. But for most companies, I'd say there's still a lot of room for improvement, and I'm hoping to see that again, this COVID situation will cause people to revisit how they might go about using their loyalty programs and enhancing the overall experience beyond just a rewards or discount structure. In terms of the value offering, I think the flip side is, if you were to point to places where I think we've seen dramatic improvements, certainly the food retailers who used to send you offers for things that you never bought in store because they were just interested in driving you to places you weren't going. I think that they've certainly honed their strategy, and now you see that, if you get 10 offers, 7 of them are products that you buy, and you really start to get the sense that they're listening and that they can see what are important products and categories to you. And then they're willing to offer you 2 or 3 additional things, which frankly, if you send me 7 things that I care about, I'm far more likely to say, you know me, and maybe I will try this deli item that you're recommending for me. And then I think the other one that we're seeing more value come out of in the last little while, and I'll just credit Amazon, although I think the Prime is such a juggernaut. You've seen a lot more paid programs out there. But what I like about Amazon Prime is that they're really thinking about the extended value proposition. So it's not just about I get free delivery and expedited delivery as a result of being a Prime member, but now I'm getting the other services that are provided, whether it's music or video or movies, and so they're extending the value into other new ways. I still think that it still feels a little bit like retargeting, like you looked at this and therefore I'm recommending this. So, they're supposed to have this incredible recommendation engine, but I still think there's a lot of headroom that they would have, given the volume of data that they could have on somebody, to be much more interesting in how they present other products and services. And so that's where I look. Do you know me? are you doing something interesting where you're providing me and you're indicating and sort of helping me experience your brand in a new and different way? And are you finding unique ways to provide value-added offerings, which again reflect who I am and what you would learn about me? And if I use those three hurdles, you don't come up with a lot of companies who really are ticking those boxes.
You talked about the kind of three principles of what folks had to look at in terms of loyalty post-COVID. Do you think there's any clear winners that have really rebranded themselves and positioned themselves a lot better than maybe 4 or 5 months ago?
If you look at it, I think recently some brand scores and brand trust scores came out, and I think the food retailers generally all had a giant uptick. And so the consumer who was probably at the bottom level of Maslow's pyramid of hierarchy of needs, about survival and safety, and still needed to go out and do food shopping. I think that the food retailers did a wonderful job of navigating through that, whether it was stockouts, whether it was the safety concerns, whether it was managing the balance between employee safety and the customer safety. I think they came out very well through that process. I also think that there's some restaurants and some people who pivoted quickly to figure out, how they were going to create more revenue, and the net of that, and food service organizations that started delivering direct to the consumer when the restaurant business dried up. I think there'll be some winners and some enduring change that comes out of those sorts of experiences. I do think there's some real winners resulting from the outcome. I think the other thing that's interesting, and it's sort of everything's spoken about, the dynamic of the change with respect to online shopping. But one of the ones that I love, and it's a personal example, is, I'm a Amazon Prime member. I go in and look at Prime to look up a product that I was needed. And of course, it was one of those things that was completely sold out and you couldn't get, and it wasn't hand sanitizer. And it said, your delivery, it wasn't a priority product. So the delivery was then 6 weeks out. And I looked at it and went, I'm not waiting 6 weeks for this. So I started to look for other alternatives, and I ordered something online through Canadian Tire. Well, the amazing thing is I would never have ordered online through Canadian Tire. I would never have done click and collect at Best Buy. I would have just gone to the store. But because of the situation with Amazon, where I would buy direct, obviously, they kind of incented me to try alternatives. And so I think there's this whole halo effect that nobody's really written about. Absolutely. As a result of the challenges that even Amazon had in dealing with the volumes that came about as a result of the pandemic.
You're a big proponent of extending customer data to the frontline employees. What do retailers stand to gain by giving the frontline that level of information?
Yeah, it's not without also saying that it needs to be done carefully and obviously respecting privacy. And but I do think that in certain environments, it makes a lot of sense for the ability for a customer, with maybe your permission right on the spot, to be able to look you up. There were we actually did this as well, but there were tests that were done going back 2 decades where cards were rigged with an RFID, and as soon as a very valuable customer came into like a branch or into the grocery store, that's the one we tried, it would ping and basically send a message to the store manager or branch manager, and then they would come down and have a little handshake and how's everything going, and make the customer feel extra special. That was maybe a little forced and contrived, but it, let's face it, we are human beings. We sort of respond to that kind of psychological stroking. And so the question then becomes, how do you create that in a non-intrusive, I'm spying on you manner, but in a way that creates an improved experience? So let's just say we'll go back to Lululemon as an example. I'm in Lululemon. I bought a lot of clothes there over time, and I can't remember the size. I really like this shirt, but I didn't remember the size I got the last time, or the color, or what colors I have. Imagine if a store clerk could say, well, let me scan your loyalty card or whatever unique identifier I have for you. And it's like, oh yeah, no, you bought the red and the green and you've got the black, you don't have the white. And you can go, okay, well, I'll take the white. I just really love this shirt. And it's as simple as that. It's about, thinking about how can you use the information you have of customers to enhance the experience, to either introduce them to new products or to be able to answer questions readily, or even to be able to look and say, oh, well, here's Scott. Wow, he's a super customer. When he comes to the checkout, it's like, hey, these are amazing running socks, and I know you're totally into running, and I'd like you to try them for free, and to give the latitude to the employee to enable that to happen. So I just think there's a lot of latitude and value that could be added by virtue of providing the frontline associates with data.
It goes back to really arming those reps. They know their customers best. There's a whole bunch of data. If we put that data in the arms of those frontline folks, 9 times out of 10, they know what to do with it, and probably will help drive your bottom line and top line quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people have talked about the old corner grocery store, whatever the guy was on Little House on the Prairie. That's really dating me. But I had that experience. I lived in a small town, Peterborough. I worked for the Quaker Oats Company very early on in my career. There was one guy who sold fine quality suits, which we all wore at that point, to the office. And when you went in to see him, you'd go and look, oh, I love this suit. And you'd look at him and he would nod or he'd shake his head. And it was like, oh, can't have that one? Who bought that one? And he'd say, yeah, the president of the company bought that one. Okay, well, what about this one? And he'd shake his head and he'd go, well, who bought that? Director of marketing bought that one last week. And so he kind of curated the wardrobes of everybody in the company so people wouldn't show up at the, navy blue suit, whatever, that's fine, doesn't matter. But, in the time when there were plaids and checks and things, you didn't want to show up in the meeting with exactly the same suit as the president of the company. That was sort of a bad move. So he was the guy who made sure nobody was offside. It was really sort of fascinating. So
in your book, you mentioned a framework of 3 R's: rewards, recognition, and relevance. As a retailer, how can I use this framework to drive emotional loyalty and ultimately customer intimacy?
Yeah, I at the end of the day, it's a little what we've talked about so far. It's the rewards piece is where most of them stop. And that's the problem, is that, just rewarding somebody doesn't really pull at the emotional heartstrings, except for a small percentage of people who we would call financial optimizers. And they are looking for the deal, and they've figured out exactly what a loyalty point is worth, and where they should trade off discount for loyalty points. And, if that's who you're targeting and that's all you want to do, that's great. But great brands, generally sell things at normal prices, and they create other value for the consumer. And so, if you move towards the right, towards the relevance side, that's really starting to tug at the ability to connect with your customer. And I think that if you always feel better, you always feel a higher emotional connection to people and brands that seem to understand or connect with the values and the things that you find most important. So that's why the migration from rewards to relevance is just so important. The thing about emotional loyalty is it's very hard to measure. I think we can say it and everybody knows what it means because it's an emotional thing, but emotions by the de facto are very hard to actually register. And that's why we've ended up with the things like Net Promoter Score out there. But at the end of the day, you got to reach even beyond Net Promoter Score. You have to reach to that point where, people have real passion and real interest in sharing their experiences with you as a brand.
It's interesting. I was just having a conversation with a mid-sized retailer last week, and they're in telco, in that multi-brand space. They're heavy on gift cards to drive traffic and drive specific brand purchases, have customers going to that retailer versus another. And part of the conversation I was having with them is, if you actually have a real relationship with your customer, you're interacting with them multiple times over that 2-year span, you're going to probably save spend on gift cards, that rewards piece, because they see your store, your sales rep as their go-to store rep to do business with. And that's something we've stood firm on for a while, is create that relevance and recognition with those customers and make them feel like you are their go-to location. Similar to Gentry and Peterborough.
Yeah, exactly. There you go.
So as leader at Loyalty One, how'd you make sure that every single department, function, employee was obsessed with customer centricity? Again, knowing that Loyalty One, your business was built on driving customer loyalty. How did you ensure that was instilled across the entire organization?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, when you have loyalty in your name, that your purpose built for helping your client companies understand how to build that long-term connection with their consumers. So foundationally, everything we did in the organization kind of pointed in that direction. And I think, to both its benefit and to its detriment over 25 years, you start to really exercise the muscle around the mechanisms, the learnings you have. And when you constantly reinforce that, and it's done through the training, it's done through how you introduce data and the importance of the kind of results that you create out of that. When you're bombarded, I think, as an associate with case study after case study of success stories on how this has worked for different client companies, you kind of drink the Kool-Aid at that point, and you really do become kind of a passionate advocate for it. Or I think you kind of look and say, yeah, this is not my tribe. And, I kind of need to find a different thing because I want to be doing marketing on this basis. And so, so success breeds it. There's no question about it. We were very focused from a leadership standpoint in terms of how we developed our know-how, how we shared that know-how. And then I think the other thing is, we were constantly at the forefront working with our partners. So whether that was in the early days, printers, and later on the digital providers, to really constantly be testing new things. And we would encourage them to come in and bring us what the latest technology or the latest thinking was, with the idea being that we might be that alpha client who would work with them to help develop and think about the application, because in a lot of ways we had assets that they couldn't find in other companies in Canada. And so when, again, your R&D flywheel is moving at a pace where that's what you're focused on, you kind of read the tea leaves as an employee. I think, an associate, you kind of look around and go, okay, I think this is what this place is about, and I'm either in or I'm not in. I think the reason I said over the long run is that, if I could go back and wave a magic wand and change something, it probably, I'd go back about 10 years in history, and, we started to focus on expanding and looking at geographic expansion and some new businesses. And, we had to reinvest more in our core capacity, which was the Air Miles program. And I think that we kind of left ourselves a little bit exposed and had to play some catch up in the last 5 years, eliminating some technical debt and some things that we could have been doing a lot sooner. But I think Blair and the team over there have done a great job of really picking up that baton over the last couple of years. And since I've left over the last year, he's running it over there and doing a great job of kind of reinventing the program bit by bit as we need to. So it is that be careful what you ask for. I think you always, as a leader, have to be keeping your eye on the ball and exactly what you're doing and ensuring that you're delivering on that, but always challenging the model and thinking about, if that is my true purpose, is to be doing X for industry and for clients and for the consumer, how do I actually stretch that and constantly challenge your business model?
Makes total sense. And so when you think of other organizations, what are some common leadership behaviors that you've seen in those orgs that have taken that loyalty leap?
I think a relentless focus on the customer. I think people who really understand and get to the heart of what their business or product is meant to do, and then they create an experience, a brand. I mean, a brand is ultimately about an experience that you're creating, whether it's a physical product or whether it's a service in the way that you interact with it. But they're really passionate advocates for making sure that the whole organization is focused around, a defined purpose of what they're there on the planet to do. That's unique and maybe better, that they can do better than anybody else. And the second thing I would say is that they have a value system that you see expressed in the way that they operate the business to fulfill that purpose. And I think great leaders balance those two things. And if they're really, really lucky, it happens to come along with a really tidy economic model that allows them to spin up, make money, and be able to continue to fund the growth of the business. And if you do that, and you're fortunate to actually be in a place that can check all those three boxes, I think you, as long as your product fulfills on its basic promise, you have a great runway ahead of you.
You talk about the leadership behaviors of companies that have taken that loyalty leap. What's the economic value for those companies? Like, based on all the years you worked at Loyalty One, did you see an inherent difference in the companies you guys worked with that had a heavy focus on the 3 R's of loyalty versus the ones that may have only focused on rewards or not at all?
I mean, I'm an inherent believer of the fact that if you pursue the rewards recognition relevance model, that at the end of the day, you're going to create differential results. It's one of those horrible things where your answer is in some way, it depends. I mean, if you're operating in a category which is under huge competitive threat, where you're losing customers, et cetera, over time, what we saw is that we could stem those losses and in some cases reverse them, right? And I can definitely point to a number of clients in different categories that an application of really focusing on their customers, understanding the dynamics, and really trying to differentiate your offering to your best customers yielded significant results. I mean, the entire premise of Loyalty One and the Air Miles side of things was really based on 3 things happening. The first was that you did a better job of retaining your very best customers who were already likely to be highly retained, but you were able to do them and get them to spend just a little more. Even your most loyal customers have headroom. The second thing was that you would convert 10 to 15% of your next best customers to best customers. And then the third thing was that you would use this coalition database, this information you had, to profile the universe of customers who should be shopping with you. And if you could just attract 2, 3, 4, 5% of those customers, the program was a home run. It created ROIs in 100% plus. There was no question that every cent and dollar you spent had a material payback to you. And that's even before you start to apply the foundational database principles we spent this time, talking about how you then enhance the system. That was probably more about the grooming and basically the way you enhance the existing customer base to be better customers. But the materiality is definitely there. I also think that tactically, we lived in an environment where Walmart expanded dramatically across Canada. It was exactly in that window when they built out, and then they built the grocery presence on top of that. And Walmart's a significant player in the food retail market now. But we managed to be very defensive and very tactical around how we use the database to target existing highly loyal customers to make sure that they were incented to continue to shop at Safeway or at A&P or now Sobeys or Metro. We incented them to make sure that in that time period when a Home Depot for against Rona or a Walmart against Safeway, and exactly during the time period when they'd be making their biggest offers to the consumer, was exactly the time period when we'd be making our own biggest offers to ensure that we ring fence those best customers and they didn't even want to go to Walmart to try. And that was hugely successful at stemming the tide of having customers move over and losing, a shop every 4 weeks or something, which is pretty material when you actually put it in context. So, I'm continue to be a passionate advocate for loyalty. I'm a huge advocate for customer data and measured marketing and how you understand who your customers are and treat them in a way that's differential and also effective at building long-term affinity, let's say.
I'm going to end it there. I think that was a great summary of our conversation. Where can our listeners find you if they want to learn more about who you are and what you've been up to?
Well, the easiest way is to find me on LinkedIn. I'm always available and checking that. I also write for Forbes. So if you go to Forbes.com and search my name, Bryan Pearson, like the airport, you'll have the stream of articles I've written over the last 5 years with a little break for travel, but now back at it.
That's awesome. Thanks, Bryan, for your time. Really appreciate it, and look forward to continuing our chat in the future.
Thanks, Scott. Enjoyed that a lot.
As always, thanks for tuning in. If you're a fan of One-to-One, be sure to give us a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. Catch you next time.